Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So today, brothers and sisters, I'm going to be talking about something that took place about 6 months ago that I was asked to talk about a lot at the time. And it was something that happened very close to home here for me in Minnesota and Minneapolis. And it was something that talking about it became kind of trending at the time. So I'm kind of disinterested in talking about things that are trending actively. So I did not want to speak about it at that time, but 6 months moved on now. It's still something that I see value in talking about in terms of, inshallah, it is a chance for me to give people some insights about youth, about adolescence especially, which is, of course, what I focus a lot on this channel. And also to teach a little bit about specifically our community here in Minneapolis, our Muslim community, and some specific things about it, just so people can understand more. So most of you probably know Abu Taymiyyah did a tour of cities in America this past winter. When he came to Minneapolis in early February, there were basically logistical issues with the setup. I think the masjid that was hosting it, number one, they were not the people who invited Abu Taymiyyah. It was an organization run by some younger brothers who invited them. And, there might have been, the masjid might not have fully understood just how big a crowd he had the potential to draw. So things were not set up well, and there were crowding issues, and all this type of stuff took place, and it became an opportunity for people on social media to really express their disgust with the clips that were shared and the manners of some of the young people that were displayed there and all this type of stuff.
Renowned speaker Abu Taymiyyah gets accosted by fellow Muslims.
How embarrassing.
They hooted and hollered at him like he was some sort of rock star.
What is this, a concert for Drake?
He was pushed and grabbed at.
They lack adab.
As Muslims, we have to have better decorum and respect.
What are you, 4? Grow up. What is this masjid?
Now, Abu Taymiyyah did a podcast afterwards with some brothers here on their channel, Dean Love, and they talked about the logistical mistakes and stuff that took place and the cold weather and all that type of stuff. So I'm not going to go too far into the logistical stuff because I more want to talk about the kids in general. Now, this masjid, this masjid is very, very close to the school that I work at. It's a masjid everybody knows, not only here, but really in the Somali diaspora. It is probably the largest masjid that is primarily Somalis in terms of the amount of people that it serves. Certainly in North America, maybe in the entire diaspora. At the school I work at, many of my students grew up at this masjid, going to it on the weekends. Their families highly involved in it. I attend Jummah at this masjid on days that I work. And when Abu Taymiyyah was coming, my students were extremely excited about it. They were all asking me if I was going to go to it. I did not go to it because I knew it was going to be very crowded, and I didn't want to deal with the crowding. More so in terms of parking. I mean, I didn't even know it would be as crowded as it was inside, but I didn't go just because I didn't want to have to deal with parking. And now this is a thing about this masjid that some of you need to understand. Okay, some of you out there, you're maybe used to the idea of a big masjid is like a really big complex somewhere with a huge private parking lot around it, and you have almost as many parking spots as there are spots to line up and pray in the masjid. And not every masjid in the world is like that. So this masjid has a small, very small parking lot. When you go there, you have to park on the street around it, and it is right in the heart of South Minneapolis in a crowded urban area. So just getting into it is a logistical issue regarding crowding. The masjid itself, it serves so many people, it makes the musalla as big as it can possibly be. And then outside the musalla, there's really just two kind of narrow hallways. Jummah is very, very crowded. And the masjid does not condone any type of free mixing or anything. I've never seen that take place at that masjid. What took place with this incident was an incident of so many young people coming out that they overwhelmed whatever was set up to structure them. And that is something that happens quite a lot with youth in the inner city, and something that happens in the schools that these kids go to as well. Now, the community here, they're not really ones to want sympathy or pity from anybody. So they don't always like it when someone talks about the challenges that they face, but there are very real challenges that the community faces that affect these kids. I've talked on this channel a lot about how the Muslim community in general is a young population of people. We have way more young people than we have older people. That issue might not be exacerbated in any place more so than it is here in Minnesota. Part of that being because Somalis, mashallah, they have lots of kids. Of course, on top of that, it's primarily a refugee community. You have people, in its origins, it's a refugee community. You have people who come here through the refugee process. It tears families apart. Wars have a way of affecting adults and men more than they affect children. So people lose their parents. People who do end up coming here, sometimes the parents can't come together, even when they get here. Most adults who come here, they have obligations and responsibilities both here and in Africa. They sometimes have to travel between the two places. And on top of just that, many of the, like other low socioeconomic status immigrant families, parents end up just having to work all day, oftentimes 12 to 16 hours a day. So with all these challenges, and with compounded by a lack of willingness of adults in the Muslim community to really get involved with the kids, you end up having some kids who are lost to the streets. Now, how that's manifested here in Minneapolis, there has always been issues with that from the beginning. But in the last 10 years, for the longest time, it was like, okay, there's some kids who are involved in stuff that we disapprove of, but overall, the majority of kids are not, and we keep those kids protected, and we bring them to an understanding that, the kids who are doing this and that type of bad thing, that's not you, and you're not involved in that. It maintained that way for a good long while. What I would say has happened over the past 10 years, especially since the advent of Snapchat, really, and just social media in general, is the kids who are involved with the more risky behavior type stuff in this inner city setting, they have gained a lot of traction and attention on social media networks within the Somali community, and the Somali diaspora in general has very strong and active social media networks. So that's affected the youth here in that in the Snapchat era, and TikTok compounded it, Instagram Live and things compounded it. You might not have most kids who are involved in this negative type of inner city activity, but the kids who are have become the center of social attention because everyone's been able to see it. And again, especially with Snapchat, how you can post something and then it deletes right away. So kids get very risky with what they're willing to post on there. So even for the kids who are involved in that, they're still talking about that stuff all the time. And I would say this stuff really hit a fever pitch probably 4 or 5 years ago when kids started getting into making rap music videos and adding this whole element of like rap competition between one another, aided by non-Muslims in the community here who themselves, that's the thing too, when we don't get involved with the youth, all the other factions of the community compete for our kids, and all the other communities, they're running out of kids. So they need our kids to sustain whatever thing they got going on. So like the Recording Institute in downtown Minneapolis that used to come out to the suburbs and recruit kids to record heavy metal music back in the 1990s, now they're recruiting Somali kids to come record rap music, and same with other people involved in that community here in the Twin Cities. And they figured out that you help these kids make some cool rap videos, it gets lots of views because they're connected to lots of other kids. So you had 4 or 5 years ago some kids from the city really going viral on YouTube with their music videos, ingrained in that type of culture. And again, it just really affected the overall youth culture here in Minneapolis amongst the Somali kids, and just what the kids have to navigate and pay attention to themselves. Now, what's kind of happened with this social media dynamic is within the Somali diaspora and their social media networks and algorithms, the narrative that has developed about Minnesotan Somalis, especially Minnesotan Somali kids, is that they're just like the worst and they're degenerates, and Minnesota is just a terrible place for Somalis, and you don't want to be like the Somali Minnesotans and this type of thing. Now, that whole narrative is really unfortunate for the kids because what it does is it has a compounding effect on the negative behaviors. Because kids, especially teenagers, they manifest what adults project onto them. And when negative things are projected onto them and they are kind of shamed in that sort of way, it doesn't give them any solution for their issue. So what they do is the identity that you're projecting onto them, they internalize it. And they, one, say, okay, if I'm that must be what I am. So I'm going to do it even more. And secondly, even though pretty much all of them, they have a sentiment within themselves that they don't want to be that negative thing and they want to find a way out of it, but someone has to be there for them to show them the way out. And when they don't have that, what they will do is keep repeating the behaviors and double down on them as a cry for help and as a test for where adults actually stand with them. Like if you actually care about them, you're going to be patient with the behaviors and you're going to show them a way out. If you don't actually care, if you don't actually care about them, well then you're going to be you're going to have kind of an elitist attitude towards them, and you're going to reject them and forget about them. And when you prove that to them, it really only hardens them, especially with teenagers. One of the ways that they get social recognition and power from one another in their immature minds is when adults when adults kind of look down upon them. There's a social power for them in showing that they're making independent decisions from what adults tell them. So like they're their own person. So when adults give this kind of attitude, like what's wrong with you type of thing, that becomes like social proof for itself in a way. And again, all this stuff, it's autocatalytic. Like it all feeds into itself and just causes the behaviors to grow and continue. Now with Abu Taymiyyah, what he's managed to do is this whole kind of social media doom cycle that these kids are in, where they're constantly viewing one another do degenerate and debasing things of varying different levels on these social media platforms. He's managed to like get into it a little bit or interrupt it a little bit. What I mean by that, I mean like, the kids will be on TikTok or IG Reels or whatever, and they see, of course, a lot of the popular culture stuff, and then they see like peers from around the city or whatever doing these daring behaviors and that type of stuff. And then occasionally they will get a reminder or something from our brother Abu Taymiyyah, and especially like clips of him. He's gotten in there because he's Somali and because he has a similar background story to many of the kids. The first thing that all the kids know about him is that he had a friend who, it's funny actually, I didn't know this about him, but so many of my students told me that he had a friend who was shot when he was young. Like I think he witnessed his friend be killed in the streets or this type of thing. And of course, many of these kids, they have lost, they've lost close ones in that way, because there's very negative extreme ends to this type of inner city culture that the youth get psyoped into. And it's funny just because I don't think, like, they don't have guns on the streets so much in the UK, so I think his friend was maybe knifed to be killed, but my students, they all think it's that he was shot because that's what's happened to their friends. So, they relate to him in that way. And, the brother, I mean, he's taken a lot of risk by putting himself out there, because students from the Khalij, Yemen or Medina, they monitor one another very closely. They scrutinize one another very closely. And a lot of times they are very suspicious of a student of knowledge who comes back or really puts himself out there. So he kind of took to TikTok, at least my impression is, he took to especially putting content on TikTok Reels, or on TikTok and IG Reels, more than a lot of the other students of knowledge. I'm sure he did that out of a sentiment of knowing that there are lost youth out there, like he saw when he was younger, who he wants to reach and do something like get them back into the masjid. And he accomplished that. And the brothers who put it together, it was put together by an organization of younger brothers, younger adult brothers, who are good brothers, who, okay, so maybe they don't have the experience to understand the logistical aspect of all that type of stuff, and they fumbled on organizational aspects of it. But they did know enough to know that bringing him in there was going to be a way to get kids to come to the masjid who haven't been there in a long time. And the reality is what the kids go through is they have a life in the masjid and at home where they act one way when they're going to the weekend schools growing up and Jummah and with mom and dad at home. And then they have a life on social media, either viewing or posting. They have a life in the public school, and they have a life on the streets that is simply a whole different thing. And they feel very separate to one another, and it's part of teenage psychology and adolescence that they're able to switch how they act and who they are from one place to another. So Abu Taymiyyah is in between. He manages to be something, from the masjid world per se, that got into their social media world. And what drew kids to be there on that day was not that it was taking place at the masjid that they went to when they were younger or anything like that, but because there was this person connected to the social media world, that a lot of them, that world outside the masjid is the one that is way more present to them, and that they spend more time in, that they're and more real to them in many ways. So because he was there, that's what drew them to the place. And when they all come as a big group, and their teenage adolescent culture and the mannerisms and the language that goes along with it is all dictated by these circumstances that they're in. They just roll with that and bring it into that place. Now it's odd in a way to see it brought into the masjid, but really it makes sense in a lot of ways, because many of those kids probably hadn't been to the masjid in a long time, because many of them, once they get to adolescence, they can put up enough resistance with mom and dad that they don't want to go to Dukes anymore, the weekend schools, or this type of thing. When they get out of high school and they get more independent, certainly, they might not come to the masjid all that much. But this drew them there because there was this thing going on, and you see a certain sentiment in them that they're showing in giving the masjid a chance in that way, and in giving him a chance. But because that wants to get back into the deen is actually just something that's within them but suffocated, for them, they have to test it out when they go back into it, especially as a group like that. And there's an extent to which, especially inner city kids, a lot of times before they can trust an adult, they have to bring the worst of themselves forward first. Because, kids in the suburbs or in small towns, including Muslim kids who live in the wealthier places in this country, they really do just as bad things, or, maybe some different types of things, but they do plenty of bad things also. But in those contexts, they're just better at hiding it. Usually because there is more room, literally more room and space to hide it. They're more likely to live in a place where they have their own bedroom and they can do whatever misbehaviors they're going to do away from other eyes. There's more space within the town to meet up in secret, this type of thing. Inner city kids, whatever their misbehavior is going to become, it's out in front of everybody because everything happens on the street, and there's always people on the street, and there's always eyes around. So they get hardened to a degree. And even the good kids, there is a degree to them. They even have to adopt hardened dispositions and mannerisms and ways of carrying themselves just to survive in the inner city, because a lot of times if you just walk down the street and you look vulnerable when you walk down the street, you don't look like you have somewhat of a tough edge to you, that can be risky. That can be physically risky. So all of that affects the general adolescent culture. And so they brought it in to the masjid that day, given the unique context that it is. But getting those kids to show up in the masjid, it is an accomplishment. And it was a good thing. And when you get to a level, there's people in the community, they've been wondering, how do you get these kids back into the masjid for years, and trying things, and they hold youth conferences or whatever, no one shows up. And these young brothers who invited him, they managed to find a way to do that. Now, when you make a new level of accomplishment and something you've been trying to do for a long time, sometimes it's messy. And what you first learn from getting to that new level is that there's new things you have to learn. So it's somewhat of a learning process. But at least the brothers, they figured out how to get those kids back, and it can be done again, and it can be done better next time. Okay, so I want to read a part of my book, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, because I wrote this book to speak to the non-Muslim educators who these kids spend a lot of time with. All our kids do, because their life and context outside of the masjid needs to be addressed, and the people in those places need to be educated. One of the things that I am inquired mostly about from public school educators regarding Muslim kids is misbehavior in school. Not necessarily high-flying, defiant misbehavior, but petty nuisance behavior, and a high volume of it is what we would call it. And so this is part of the book where I'm explaining the good manners that Islam teaches based on the character of the Prophet ﷺ, and then like the contradiction that teachers might see when they learn about, and do see when they learn about this, and they see some kids who have all the misbehaviors, this type of thing. So I wrote, I've consulted with educators who learn the Islamic teachings of good manners and wonder why it is then that they have Muslim students who can be rather misbehaved and uncouth in school. They wonder if this indicates a lack of regard or care for the religion on the part of those students. And of course, even amongst Muslims, we wonder this. When kids get to have bad manners, young people, and these misbehaviors, does it mean they don't care about the religion, or they've rejected the religion intellectually or something like that, or they don't care about the religion in their heart? For myself, having taught in the inner city to kids who come from economically deprived backgrounds and familial backgrounds with high experiences of trauma, I've had my share of students who were greatly challenged with behavior problems in school, as well as with their own personal and peer-related turmoil outside of school, from falling prey to societal traps such as gangs and drug abuse. These are kids that many teachers often want to cast off, and oftentimes we in the Muslim community want to cast these kids off as well. In the case of Muslim kids who fall into these ills, I do not find in my conversations with them that they have a rejection of Islam in their hearts at all. Family members of these youth reaffirm the same sentiment to me as well. It is grossly mistaken to see misbehaving kids as having a flippant inward attitude about Islam. On the contrary, Islam is often something they care deeply about, but they are struggling through a variety of developmental and psychological factors that result in destructive behavior patterns. Something that cannot be ignored is that an awakening of Islam in their hearts and minds and connecting it to healthy and productive societal and interpersonal behaviors is what likely holds the most immediate key to rectifying their personal conduct and paths in life. So how does it benefit anyone when explicit talk about it is suffocated in the public school that monopolizes their time in childhood? There is a large extent to which a lack of both an understanding of Islam and the feeling of Islam having an active presence as a live choice in life in Western society are core identifiable factors in these young people's self-destructive behavior patterns. Many of them explicitly expressed to me that they wish they could learn more about Islam and have more time to know it. But they are hindered by other distractions, of which government mandates that they attend secular public schools are no small part. This is a matter to keep in mind as you read this book. It is clear from the Islamic sources that have been shown here that Islam is intended to act as a vehicle to inspire good conduct and manners. For many Muslim young people growing up in a society and being constantly put into environments where Islam and religious identity is implicitly suppressed and unwelcome has the consequence of cutting them off from the primary source of inspiration for good conduct that their cultural background operates upon. When these misbehavior patterns do occur, there is no doubt that normal developmental factors are at play, yet with Muslim kids, the issue is deeper than something that can be simply passed off as kids being kids. So, brothers and sisters, the situation itself, like a lot of those kids, they might have been at school that day and had been called to like a school assembly, let's say, where they all gathered together and they were exhibiting behaviors much worse than that because it's just, it's their adolescent behavior in this, in the specific cultural milieu that they are in. And very few of us are in these places doing anything about it. So, just kind of scoffing at it. And I understand people, it's okay. Some people, it's their thing. They're making TikToks or whatever, and you respond to whatever's trending, and you give your little commentary on whatever it is as you see it. Okay, I get the thing. But look, brothers and sisters, like you see someone on the news talking about Islam, and they're always the limits of their information is always very apparent. That happens when you see anyone talking about something where you know more about the situation and context. So I'm not saying that anything is going to change with those types of dynamics, but seeing people talk about the situation in the way they did, it was upsetting to me. And what was upsetting was this whole matter of the kids internalizing this thing where okay, Minneapolis Somali kids are just the worst kids. Like that part, that is part of their identity now. And it was before this, but with this, they got to see it being reaffirmed in places on social media outside just the Somali specific algorithms. So it served to just only reaffirm that. And another thing very upsetting, something that really flied on social media at the time was the idea that Abu Taymiyyah said that he was not going to come back.
He told them he came to help them in their deen, to chill out, and that he's not coming back.
And he said something to the effect of, I don't know if I will come back, but, he's speaking in terms of not knowing the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, the brother, it was a highly stressful situation for him. I'm not faulting him. He could have done a little better with his mannerisms and perhaps his messaging and this type of stuff, in both places where he talks. He could have done better. But, it's a learning experience for him too. But people, lots of people directly saying on social media, he told them he'd never come back. A lot of the kids, they heard that more than they heard anything that he actually said. And he's and following up from it, he's clarified a lot of things and said good things about the fact that so many people came to the masjid and all that type of stuff, and I'm happy about that.
Minnesota was my favorite state. Minnesota.
That's what all the Somalis are, isn't it?
The fact that they decided to leave their homes and to come to the masjid, that's what really made me feel great, wallahi.
But the stuff that is constantly being messaged throughout the feeds when this is going on, that's really what the kids heard more. So again, these kids, when they get the sense someone might care about them or have something to offer them, they will test them up front to see how serious they are. So when some kids, when they got the impression from what people on TikTok were saying that he's not going to come back, that he said he wouldn't come back. That's what they heard and that's what they thought. And then it's like, oh, you know, screw him, forget him, you know, that type of thing. And there's some kids, they still think that. So, inshallah, I'm hoping for him to clarify even more than he already has, that was not what he said, and that he is willing to come back. Inshallah, I hope he comes back as soon as possible. And I'm willing to work to make arrangements, busy as he is, for him to come back and again, can come back in a better way. Come back for like a whole week, do several different sessions and series. And it could be something that is very impactful to these kids and to changing them. And of course, brothers and sisters, all of you should understand that kids like this, they have great potential to turn around in their lives. Developing young people are very much not permanent in who they are. They need guidance. They need direct guidance from people who they can trust and are involved in their lives. And they need good leadership. They need good leadership. And actually, all of them coming out on that day really shows how thirsty for that they actually are. And we should, as Muslims, we should understand things like the story of Malcolm X and brothers like Abu Taymiyyah and many, many other brothers who have been involved in rough things or whatever and turned it around in life and then become great callers to the religion. The kids in the city, they have that potential, and they have the potential to do it as a whole community, not just individuals amongst them. And they can do it with the right leadership, and they need people to believe in them. That believing in that will do much more for, and projecting that onto these kids really will do much more than having these kind of pretentious attitudes of disgust or whatever, which, using that as a tactic to turn around young people, that's a tool that it should only be used very, very selectively with kids who you have a very specific, deep kind of connection with. And, we might associate shaming people with something that, some people, I mean, I understand the intellectual reasoning that says, well, if you shame people and you put them down, that will pressure them into exhibiting right behaviors. That works when you have a totally enclosed society that is enclosed within a certain value system that everyone shares. It doesn't work that way when you have an open society and you're competing for the mind and hearts of people, because people have too many other places to go. And you act that way towards young people, they'll internalize it as, okay, you say that, fine, I'm going to go do it even more, and I got plenty of places where I can go and do that. Okay, so I say all this, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Anything good that was said comes from Allah. Anything wrong that was said comes from the evil and deficiencies within myself. I bear witness that there's none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I seek repentance from Him.